A pistol was pressed tightly against his head. Two armed men stood beside him, but instead of panicking, he calmly pressed the timer on his watch. When you have to decide your fate. 9 seconds. 9 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. McCall moved with a deadly rhythm that was almost artistic, and in an instant, he turned the tables and eliminated them all. Only the wounded mob boss remained, crawling across the floor, his eyes filled with pure terror. McCall picked up a shotgun, but he didn't fire immediately. Instead, he tapped the barrel slowly against the ground, letting the man feel the weight of fear, the same fear these criminals had inflicted on countless innocent people. Then a single, muffled gunshot echoed. The mob boss's crimes ended right there. McCall took the keys, slung his backpack over his shoulder, and walked out of the bloodstained winery. Inside a car parked at the entrance, he noticed a young boy, the mob boss's grandson. Out of the last trace of compassion in his heart, he didn't harm the child, he simply warned him to stay in the car and not move. But human nature and the inheritance of violence are more complicated than he expected. When McCall turned back, he saw the boy trembling, holding a gun, then running away in panic. McCall didn't shoot, he simply sat down, exhausted. Maybe evil has no age, and perhaps the life he had lived fighting violence with violence was finally catching up to him. The gunshot wound in his back had damaged his internal organs. Relying on sheer willpower, he managed to board a ferry off the island, but after the ferry docked, he collapsed on an empty coastal road, having lost too much blood. Fortunately, a young police officer found him and brought him to a small-town doctor. After 2 days of intensive care, McCall finally woke up. Because the injury was a gunshot wound, the doctor remained cautious about him. McCall himself wasn't even sure whether he deserved to be called a good man. His past was filled with killing. That night, he woke suddenly from a nightmare. Instinctively, he looked at his backpack beside the bed. It hadn't been touched. For the first time, he allowed himself to relax. This doctor was someone he could trust. He began recovering in the small town. It was a place that felt forgotten by time, located along the beautiful Italian coastline, where life moved slowly, and the people were warm and sincere. Each day, McCall walked through the streets with a cane, quietly observing the simple kindness around him. The cafe owner teased his taste in coffee, but always served him the best cup anyway. The police officer who saved him walked by with his daughter. He never asked about McCall's past. He simply said, "Everyone here is good people. I hope you'll be one too." McCall understood the meaning behind those words. Even a little girl shyly placed a cookie in his hand before leaving, and when the fish shop owner learned he was a friend of Enzo, he refused to take any money for the fish. For the first time in years, McCall began to think, maybe he could spend the rest of his life here in peace. But wherever there is sunlight, there is always shadow. As a former elite operative, McCall quickly sensed something was wrong. This peaceful town was living under an invisible cloud of fear. Motorcycles would roar through the streets from time to time. They belonged to the Camorra crime family. A local enforcer named Marco moved from shop to shop, collecting heavy protection fees like a swarm of locusts. One day, McCall watched Marco brutally beat the owner of a fish shop, just because he couldn't pay on time. Hearing the screams, seeing the anger and helplessness in the neighbor's eyes, McCall's fists tightened. But in the end, he held back. He was only a passerby. He didn't want to bring trouble to this place. Marco left arrogantly, glancing at McCall and dismissing him as just another tourist. Marco's arrogance came from his brother Vincent, a powerful leader within the local Camorra organization. Vincent planned to forcefully buy up the entire town and turn it into a resort and casino to drive residents away. He used unimaginable cruelty when one homeowner refused to sell. Vincent ordered a disabled old man to be publicly hanged as a warning. The brutality suffocated the entire town with fear. McCall understood that violence alone might not be enough to destroy a cancer this deep-rooted, so he made an anonymous phone call, providing intelligence about a suspicious winery. Investigators soon discovered that the wine barrels weren't filled with wine at all, but synthetic drugs. Vincent was using the massive profits to fund international criminal networks. McCall deliberately guided the investigation toward the town, hoping law enforcement would uproot the organization completely. As his injuries healed, one question continued to trouble him. He asked the doctor, "When I came here, you treated me, you didn't call the police, you didn't ask who I was. Why?" The doctor simply replied, "I don't know whether you're a good man or a bad man, but only a good man would ask that question." Those words struck McCall deeply. For years, he had punished evil with violence, his hands stained with blood. He had never believed himself to be a good man. After recovering, he planned to leave quietly, but one evening, he saw crowds in the town square running in panic. In the distance, flames lit up the night sky. A restaurant was burning. The owner tried desperately to rush into the fire, while his wife collapsed on the ground. Wailing in despair, not far away, Marco and his men watched with mocking smiles. At that moment, the anger in McCall's heart finally erupted. He turned and walked into an old church, not to pray, but to confess in advance. At the same time, the police officer discovered surveillance footage showing a van linked to the arson and reported it to headquarters, but he had no idea that this act of justice would nearly destroy his family. In retaliation, the gang kidnapped his daughter and brutally beat him when he returned home. The movie ends here. Thanks for your watching. Leave your comments below and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this, turn on the notification, and leave a like to help the channel out.